everybody. It looks like we're back, though. It looks like we're back. In case you were in the stream, sorry about that. Just having some technical difficulties. Wi-Fi is the worst, and the Wi-Fi in my house has not been the best recently. But like I was saying, and Notre Dame, I don't know when I actually cut out, but between 10 and 11 games for every conference, the ACC is the only conference actually playing 11 games with 10 conference games and one non-con game. Notre Dame will play 10 ACC teams. The AAC will allow up to 12 games, with the AAC championship game being played in that same 2-week period at the stadium of the regular season champion. The MAC, like Nicole Auerbach from The Athletic reported, did not come to a consensus about the decision on the fall season on August 6th, and they're expected to meet again on August 8th. Listen, the Conference USA has lost several games because of the decisions that other conferences are making. I think this is the biggest point here, and I think something that's being overlooked a little bit is that to a certain extent these conferences have to communicate with each other. I mean, the perfect example here is the SEC and the ACC. The ACC made their conference schedule with the idea of playing those non-conference games against their rival SEC schools, for example, Florida State and Florida, with the assumption that the SEC would do the same thing, and they didn't. So they made a schedule. So now they just have a non-conference game just sort of floating out there, while most conferences are not doing that many non-conference games. So, you don't have several non-conference games to, get a bye game in, but also play a game that's challenging, can help your resume. You have to pick between one or the other, and and the availability for these games goes down even more when there's not communication between conferences, which I think is worrisome, because at some point, for a completion of this season to actually happen, for there to be a conclusion, and we don't know what the college football playoff is going to look like yet. We don't know, we're still, August 7th. We're still roughly, we're almost exactly 5 months away from that. And so we don't know what this place is going to look like in 5 months. So we'll get information on that when we get it. But at some point, there's going to have to be a discussion between conferences, a discussion with the NCAA, a discussion with the college football committees to make this actually happen. Will there be a bowl season? All of these things are important questions. And to answer them, conferences have to be communicating. And clearly the SEC and the ACC weren't communicating. They were just making assumptions, specifically the ACC, making an assumption about how the SEC would approach their schedule, and they got it wrong. They assumed wrong. And now they're in an awkward situation, but there's so many things up in the air when it comes to the college football season that you need conferences to at least be not necessarily on the same page with what they're going to do, but just on the same page when it comes to knowing what everybody else is going to do. Because communication is going to be key here, and even if you can exist in a conference bubble, not that they're actually in bubbles, but if you can exist in a conference bubble, but you can only exist in a conference bubble for so long. Because if you want to have a conclusion of this season, you're going to need those conferences to come together. And you're going to need those conferences to work together to figure out how they're actually going to conclude the season, have a college football playoff, so on and so forth. But we'll see. We'll see if it happens. We talked about it on the last show. I'm not convinced there will actually be a college football season yet. I think what happens between the beginning of classes and people actually being on campus and these football seasons actually starting, specifically those football seasons that are starting late in September, when you have a chance to really see what people being back on college campuses is actually going to do to COVID tests, to COVID cases, to see, okay, just how much just how much is the interactions that are had on a college campus going to impact cases? Are we going to see campuses that have, thousands of cases on their campus because it's spread throughout a dorm? I think it's very realistic to say that the answer to that question is going to be yes, no matter what you do. But I think that's going to have an impact on this season, just because it gets a whole lot harder to justify college football when the places where these college athletes are living are not safe. And maybe we get to a point where, I think it certainly helps from an athletic standpoint that there are, for the most part, there's an option in a lot of places to do all your classes online or to come and live on campus. A lot of places are doing hybrid. Aren't going to be as many people actually on campus, and I think that's helpful, certainly, when it comes to controlling COVID-19 on campuses and keeping everybody, but in this conversation in particular, college athletes safe. I think that's very helpful. But at the same time, I mean, we're talking about, you saw Louisville completely shut down operations for 4 different athletic teams this week because they had 29 positive cases connected to an off-campus party. I'm 3 months removed from being a college student. College students are stupid. It's just true. It's just true. It's not a knock on anybody. It's just true. We have a invincibility complex, that we assume that nothing bad's gonna happen to us, and that this is a dangerous time to have that feeling. It's gonna happen. Athletes are gonna go to parties. People are gonna go to parties. They're gonna be in dorms, in class, not following the strictest, following the rules to the utmost extent, and it puts people in danger. And so, I think if you're rooting for college football to happen, you should really root for people being back on campus to work and to not, for there to not be a bunch of cases. I mean, in theory, just like a bubble. I mean, college campuses, for the most part, college campuses to a certain extent can work like a bubble, and you can't keep everybody on campus. Like, that's not going to happen. But you can't keep everybody from going to the grocery store or whatever it might be. So it's not going to be a bubble to the extent of the NBA bubble or anything. But in theory, if you get everybody tested prior to them coming to school, I think that every campus should have a requirement that everybody gets tested. And honestly, the school should do a quarantine. That's what they should do. Everyone should get tested before they come. You go and you get your negative test, and that negative test allows you to come to campus. And then you move in, you take another test, and then you quarantine in your room until you get that test back for a couple days. You quarantine for 3 days or whatever it might be, and then you can start to move around campus. I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think it's certainly not a whole lot to ask, especially if you open campus a little faster, allow students to come back, a week prior to classes. You get people in, you stagger arrival dates so that there aren't too many people walking the halls at the same time, and then it's completely doable. But the initial point of this entire conversation, being college football, being conferences not really communicating between each other, there are a lot of different hurdles to jump here, but we'll see. We'll see if it actually happens. I think at this point, there's going to have to be something pretty substantial for it to not happen, at least to a certain extent. I think I'm certainly to the point where if it's not going to shut things down at this point, it's going to have to be pretty severe, relatively speaking, to what's already severe, to actually get it to be shut down and for it to not happen. I want to run through the cultures poll real quick. Clemson, Ohio State, Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Oklahoma, Penn State, Florida, Oregon, Notre Dame, Auburn, Wisconsin, Texas A&M, Texas, Michigan, Oklahoma State, USC, Minnesota, North Carolina, Utah, UCF, Cincinnati, Iowa, Virginia Tech, and Iowa State. You got a good, you're dominating if you're the SEC. You got Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Florida, and Auburn all in the top 11. Texas A&M is there. The Big 12, you've got Texas there. You got Oklahoma there. The Big Ten always, and Iowa State right there in the top 25. You got Big Ten teams. You got um, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Michigan, all in the top 15. Oklahoma State also there for the Big 12. It's a pretty typical top 25. You got some cool teams down there at the bottom. You got another ACC team, two ACC teams in the top 25 at least, giving some, which means that at least in theory those could be relatively difficult games for Clemson. I think Clemson's the best team in the country. They have the best quarterback in the country, and they're hungry after last season. You got Penn State in there for the Big Ten as well, Minnesota for the Big Ten. Another really solid year for the Big Ten, and a lot of good SEC teams this year as well. Of course, that was the case last year as well, and to a certain extent is the case for every single season. But I think, it's not a surprise. They went to the championship game again, but lost to LSU and Joe Burrow. You've got Trevor Lawrence, who's trying to get his second title, and then heading to the NFL. There's a reason to get one this year because it's probably Trevor Lawrence's last year. Not probably, it is, unless something terrible happens and unless something terrible happens and he gets hurt right before the draft or whatever it might be. It's going to be Trevor Lawrence's last year with Clemson. So I think they've got some motivation from multiple places, and they're just the best team in the country to start the season. I'm pretty confident that. I know Ohio State's going to be phenomenal as usual, but that's the coaches poll, and things like this are largely insignificant. But putting lists polls like this together, you only do it if you really think there's going to be a season. You only take the time to do this if you actually think there's going to be a season. That's what it looks like right now. Coming up next, we're going to talk about my NBA power rankings, some of my takeaways halfway through the seeding games in the Orlando bubble. We'll do that next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Friday. Thank you so much for being a part of our day. 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. We made it through another week. We'll do the podium here in about 15 minutes. But what I want to start with now, what I want to get to now, is my NBA power rankings over at 110sportsmedia.com that came out this morning. Listen, before we go to my top five, I want to lay out an explanation. I'm going to read from my article. Quote, the 110 Sports NBA Power Rankings are not an examination of just who has the best record in the bubble. That would be pointless. Then you just go look at the records. Then the article wouldn't need to be written. It's also not an examination of who should be the favorite at that moment in time to win the NBA championship. Who is first on my list, and we'll get to it in just a second. Who is first is not who I would say is going to win the NBA Finals. Yes, the rankings will take into account performance in the bubble, but it will also be influenced by the team's position in the league and not just overall performance. So, for example, the Phoenix Suns on my list are 13th. They now have a shot to get into the play-in game. They're the only team that's 4-0. But they're not going to sniff the top of this list because they're the Phoenix Suns. But they have played well. They have beat good teams. And they've outperformed teams like the Jazz, who are in 14th, the Mavericks, who are in 15th. The Trailblazers are directly ahead of them at 3-1. And then you've got teams like the Sixers and the Pacers at 11-10 right in front of them. So that's where I'm coming from here. It's not an examination of an NBA Finals favorite, and it's not an examination of who's playing the best necessarily in the last week. It's a combination of the two, and so the metaphorical number that those two values bring up is how, and there's no rhyme or reason necessarily. There's no template for what those values are. It's just an examination and seeing where those teams actually stack up. So, we'll just run through all 22. I'll just start, when we get to 5, I'll start doing some explanation. 22, the Wizards, 0-4, horrible. Rui Hachimura was good in the first game, hasn't been great since. Not a whole lot to talk about there. The Kings 1-3, Bogdanovic 35 points to get over the Pelicans, who haven't been all that great either. 1-3, they're 21st. Memphis Grizzlies 20th. They're 0-4. They should be 2-2. They really should be. It's also really tough that Jaren Jackson Jr. out with a meniscus tear. So there are certainly, I think 0-4 looks a lot uglier than it actually has been. They're young. They've made a couple young mistakes in close games, specifically the first two. They gave up a double-digit lead against Portland and then fouled a jump shooter at the buzzer against San Antonio to start 0-2. 19, the Nets. I never thought that the Nets would still be half a game up on Orlando after 4 games. They are. They're 2-2. With that being said, they're still putting out a glorified G League team, and so they're 19th. 18th, the Pelicans. They get a win over the Grizzlies. That's about it. But they clearly aren't all that interested in the playing games. Zion Williamson has only played more than 15 minutes twice. He scored 24 and 23 points in the 2 games that he played more than 20 minutes. Imagine that. You put your best player on the floor and you actually are better on the basketball court. Imagine that. Ultimately, not that big a deal. Followed by the Magic, who are 2-2. They've been fine, which is literally the definition of Orlando. 16, the San Antonio Spurs at 2-2. They took care of the Spurs and Grizzlies, the Kings and Grizzlies, and then lost their next 2 games to the Sixers and Nuggets, who are, significantly better teams. 15 is Dallas. They're just horrible in crunch time. They're 15-23 now this year in games decided by 5, when the game is within 5 points in the last 5 minutes. They should have beat the Rockets. They were up by 7 with 45 seconds left and managed to lose the game. 14, Utah, 2-2. 13, Phoenix, like I mentioned. 12, Portland, 3-1. They really could be 4-0. They're pretty close. Boston played really well and just barely was able to beat them. Gary Trent Jr. is 22 of 35 from the 3-point line. Gary Trent Jr. is 22 of 35 from the three-point line this season in the bubble. That's pretty remarkable. Really remarkable, actually. And he's been phenomenal off the bench for Portland. They're 12th, 11th, Philly. So this is what I'm talking about. Portland's definitely been better than Philly so far, but Philly is still a team I'd pick to win the NBA Finals before I'd pick Portland. Philly is 11th. The Pacers are 10th, 3-1. Nate McMillan has been phenomenal. He really has. TJ Warren has been phenomenal as well. They just keep winning games when they don't have all of their players. Oklahoma City 9th at 2-1. They have a chance to go to 3-1. They played the Grizzlies today, and like I said, the Grizzlies are in a tough spot. So they have a chance to move to 3-1. Denver, basically when Jokic goes, Denver goes. Jokic was really great in both games that they've won. He was average at best and not good in one of the games that they lost. Michael Porter Jr. has been the story so far. He scored at least 27 points in their last 3 games, peaking at 37 points in a game that Jokic actually also had 30, and they scored 67 combined. Houston, 3-1, is 7th. They got wins over the Mavs, Bucks, and Lakers. If I had more confidence in this team to win an NBA championship, they'd be a little higher than this, but 7 seems like a pretty good spot for them. They've taken 48 threes in every game in true Rockets fashion. 6, Miami Heat. They could have gone 3-1. They'd be in the top 5 if they had beaten the Bucks, but they gave up a 23-point lead and lost by 14. All right, top 5. Number 5, we're going with Boston. Boston started the bubble with games against the Bucks, Trailblazers, and Heat. That's really tough way to start. They've gone a respectable 2-2. Jason Tatum, after a really tough first game, has sort of come back to form a little bit. Hasn't been phenomenal, but he had 34 points, 23 points, and 19 points in their next 3 games. So certainly has been solid, but he hasn't been phenomenal. Kemba Walker hasn't played a whole lot of minutes. They're still 2-2. I think that's worth mentioning for sure, is that even without him playing a whole lot of minutes, they're still 2-2. So I went with Boston. They're 2-2. They still have that 2.5 game lead over Miami for the 3 seeds. So they're sitting pretty there. 4, I went with the Lakers. Listen, the Lakers are in the top 5 because they're still a team that can win the title, not because of their performance in the bubble. Yes, they're 2-3, but they've scored 97 points or less in 3 of those games, 3 of those 5 games. They're here just because, the Rockets beat the JV version of the Lakers. The Lakers have kind of shut it down. LeBron doesn't care because, they've already locked up the 1 seed. They're going to be the 1 seed, so it doesn't really matter. So I'm not putting too much stock in what's happening here, especially at least from an AD and LeBron performance standpoint. But with that being said, they haven't been great. There are very real questions about who else is going to score other than LeBron and AD. Like, very real questions. Is there anybody else that you can feel good about handling the ball other than LeBron James? These are all very real questions. We'll see if they have answers to them, or we'll see if it doesn't really matter what the answers to those questions are once we get to playoff time, because honestly that's certainly a possibility that we get to playoff time and all of these concerns just aren't that big of a deal because LeBron and AD are playing incredibly well. Number 3, the Clippers. Clippers are here for a couple reasons. Devin Booker being one of them, little buzzer beater. The other one being that they're just not completely healthy yet. This is, for what it's worth, the team I would pick to win the NBA Finals right now. They're 3rd just because they've been relatively uninspiring at points. They just got Lou Williams back. They haven't seen Montrezl Harrell yet. they're still the worst matchup for anybody come playoff time, but I went with them at 3 just because I haven't been super impressed. They lost to the Lakers, which doesn't mean a whole lot, but the Bucks have better wins. They handled Boston and Miami. The Boston, I have Milwaukee 2 here. They handled Boston and Miami. They lost to Brooklyn, but Giannis only played 16 minutes. He had 16 points on 8 shots in that 16 minutes, which is pretty impressive. There's certainly questions about their offensive balance too. Not quite as huge questions as the Lakers, but it's definitely still there. But they still have the best record in the NBA right now for the regular season. They went with 2, and then number 1, the Toronto Raptors. Listen, I would not pick the Toronto Raptors to win the NBA Finals, but when we're talking about that formula there, where their stance are in the NBA and title contender is where they are. That's their stance. And they've easily been the best team. Not easily. Phoenix is up there in terms of how hot they are. But in terms of the teams that have serious chances to win an NBA Finals, the Raptors are definitely looked better than anybody else. They've held 2 of their 3 opponents to less than 100 points. Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry continue to show that they can be a backcourt for a team that has real aspirations of winning an NBA championship. They're so deep. You've got OG Anunoby, Pascal Siakam, Norman Powell, Marc Gasol, Chris Boucher. You got a lot of bodies there and a lot of guys that can play good minutes for you. They've been the most impressive in my opinion so far. And I'm really excited to see what they look like. They've cemented themselves in that 2 spot. There were questions. Can Boston track them down? That's not going to happen. They clearly just weren't going to let that happen. So shouts to the Raptors. They're my number 1 right now in the power rankings. We'll probably get 1 more power rankings in next Friday, and then we'll have with the 16 teams that made the playoffs. I'm going to rank them in terms of who I think can win the title to who has no chance of winning the title, from 1 to 16, who I think has the best chances to win an NBA title. But that's my power rankings right now. I gave you a lot of my takeaways here. I still love the way it looks on TV. I'm still very entertained. There's a lot up in the air still. We can let's take a look at the standings real quick in the NBA. I mean, the West is getting incredibly interesting. The East is kind of cemented. I mean, there's not a whole lot left to happen over there, apart from the bottom 4 teams maybe doing some flip-flopping. The Pacers are only a game behind the Heat, but the Pacers are going to play 4 good teams, including the Heat twice, actually. Now that I think about it, I'm pretty sure they're a team that is going to play the Heat twice. Yes, they play the Heat twice in their last 4 games, so there's a chance that they win both of those games and hop into the 4 seed. I don't think that's going to happen. I think the Heat are the better basketball team. I still think that the Nets will drop to the 8 seed, and the Magic will actually end up with that 7 seed. Philly, I think, is going to stay in 6th, especially with Ben Simmons being out with a knee injury. Milwaukee is cemented. Toronto is just as cemented. Boston is, maintained the 2.5 game lead they had on Miami when the bubble started. But it's much more interesting in the West. The Clippers are still a game and a half ahead of Denver, and Denver's still a game and a half ahead of 4th place. I think that's probably where we'll end up. The top 3 will stay the same. I don't foresee any major shifting there. I think the Rockets and the Thunder will end up in the 4 and 5 spot, and the Jazz will ultimately end up in the 6th spot, playing Denver in the first round. Dallas is in no danger of catching the 6th seed or giving up the 7. Memphis, now half a game ahead of Portland for the 9 seed. They'll be tied if the Grizzlies lose today to the Oklahoma City Thunder. And for what it's worth, the Jazz and the Rockets and Thunder will all be 8 games back of the Lakers in that 4-5-6 if Oklahoma City wins today. Phoenix, a game and a half back of Portland. San Antonio tied right there with Phoenix and Sacramento and New Orleans. Now 2.5 games back of the Grizzlies. Haven't made up all that much ground because both teams have gone 1-3. There's a lot that can happen there. You could have Memphis win a couple games and hold on to that 8 seed. You could have them lose 2 more and really be fighting for the 9 seed at that point. There's a lot that could happen here. The Suns are playing phenomenal basketball. Portland's the best team out of this group. There's a lot left to decide. There won't even be a play-in game in the East, but there's going to be a play-in game in the West, and it's not clear A, who's going to be in there, and A, who's going to be in there, and B, who's going to have to win 2 games to get the 8 seed. Who's going to be that 9 seed? Both of those things are still up in the air. If you made me bet right now, I would bet on the Blazers to actually get that 8 seed and would bet on the Grizzlies to hold on to that 9 seed. That would be where I would bet right now. Portland a game, half a game back. I think the Grizzlies, you would hope would be able to hold on to a 1.5 lead over 3 games, but you also hope that they would be able to hold on to a 3.5 game lead over 8, and clearly that's not working out so well. So, those are my power rankings. Those are my takeaways. I'm really excited for the second half of these seeding games, really excited for the playoffs. There's still some things that need to shake out, and I'm very much looking forward to it. When we come back, we'll do the podium. My 3 favorites, my 3 guys, bronze, silver, and gold, who I would, put at the top with chances to win the PGA Championship. We'll do that next on the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Friday, segment 3. Getting close to the end of the show, getting close to the end of the week. Hope you all had a phenomenal week. It's nice outside where I am. Hope it's nice outside where you are. And please stay safe this weekend. Make good choices. But we made it through another week. 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. Thank you so much for making us part of your day. What I want to get to now is the podium. Let's crank it out. The podium, going to add some context here to the podium first. We're 1 day into the PGA Championship over at TPC Harding Park in San Francisco. Round is underway. There's the early guys out there. It's 8:45 local time there out in San Francisco. But after 1 day, you had 2 guys at the top of the leaderboard. Jason Day and Brendan Todd at 5 under. Haotong Lee 3 under through 5 after a first round 67 3 under. He's actually taken the solo lead at 6 under. You have Bud Colley, Zach Johnson, a whole mess of guys at 4 under. Bud Colley, Zach Johnson, Martin Keimer, Brooks Koepka, Michael Lorenzo Vera, Justin Rose, Xander Schauffele, Scotty Scheffler, and Brendan Steele all at 4 under. You had a lot of guys, 47 players under par in first round of the PGA Championship. Tiger Woods 2 under. Putted really well. He's got a new putter in the bag this week. Putted well. It was off to a good start for El Tigre, for Eldrick. Bryson DeChambeau was 2 under yesterday. If you saw, it was actually absolutely hilarious. Broke his driver head just leaning over to pick up. He leaned on it to pick up his tee after a tee shot, and it just snapped. It was actually a very amicable and friendly conversation with the rules guy, especially when the rules guy is giving him what he wants. And the rule is if you break a club in the act of playing, it's a local rule out at TPC Harding Park, that you get to replace it. Now, if you're abusing the club, you don't get to replace it, but he was just leaning over on it to pick up his tee. It snapped, so he was able to get a new shaft in his driver and continue on. But my podium today, after watching a lot of golf yesterday, are my 3 favorites, so bronze, silver, and gold. My bronze here is Justin Rose. Was really impressed with what Justin did yesterday. He was really solid. I think, because he's had some equipment issues, he really had some some a tough go at it, just with some distances and things. He didn't drive it great yesterday, but he putted it really well, gained 2.276 strokes on the field. Putting yesterday, strokes gained total 5.115. 4 under, he had 6 birdies, 2 bogeys. 6 birdies, 2 bogeys. If he just drives it a little better, he could be even better. Tyler the Toucan, thank you for the 3 bits. Very much appreciate that. Listen, 5.1 strokes again. I think if he hits a few more fairways, he's a great iron player, very good ball striker. And when that putter's rolling, he got to number 1 in the world for a reason. It was a time when he was putting really, really well. He putted well yesterday, and if he continues to do so, I think he has a good shot of winning. My silver medal is Xander Schauffele. Xander Schauffele's played in 11 major championships. He's finished top 6 in 6 of them, which is absolutely ridiculous. And he got off to a phenomenal start yesterday. 32 on the front 9, 34 on the back 9, 5 birdies, 1 bogey. Hit half of his fairways, driving distance 295. He had an even better putting day than Justin Rose did. Xander is a great ball striker, one of the better drivers of the golf ball on tour. He hits it a long way too, and he checks a lot of those boxes. He clearly doesn't shy away from majors, plays very, very well in them actually, and I like him a lot. He doesn't tee off for another 6 hours, which is crazy, but I like him a lot. I like him a lot this week. And then after his 4 under, I know it's very vanilla, but after his 4 under yesterday and his status as the king of PGA Championships right now, my gold medal is Brooks Koepka. The way Brooks approaches majors is so unique, so fortuitous, because he's clearly all he cares about are the majors, but at the same time, he doesn't overhype majors, doesn't over prepare, doesn't get too worked up about them. It's really quite an interesting approach with which he brings to PGA Championships. It really is. It's very, very interesting. He had 6 birdies, 2 bogeys. He hit 64% of his fairways with an average driving distance of 310. I mean, you just can't pay for that kind of you can't long and straight. Long and straight. He's talking. He had a great round. Sort of a bounce back tournament at the WGC FedEx in Memphis last week. Had a chance to win if he hadn't put the ball in the water on 18. I think he's in a really good spot. Really, really good spot to win a third straight PGA Championship, which is just ridiculous that he has a chance to do that. But he's first on my list. He's 4 under, now 2 back of Hao Tong Li. He doesn't tee off for a while either, but after one round, 4 under, I that's my pick here. I think that's a pretty safe one, but after what I saw from Brooks yesterday, I think he's got a really good shot. And, of course, being someone who's won 2 straight PGA Championships and looking for a third, and putting himself in a really great position to do so after the first round. But that's the podium. We'll come back here in just a few minutes with FYI. You're watching the JMULL Show on 110sportsmedia.com. Welcome back to the JMULL Show on a Friday. Wrapping up the show here. Another week of 110 Sports. Thank you so much for being a part of it. 110sportsmedia.com/live, twitch.tv/110sports. Thank you so much for making us part of yet another week here at 110 Sports. Very much appreciate it. Check out all the written content, podcast, shows that we have over at 110sportsmedia.com right now. My power rankings, we talked about that. Chris Brown's weekly Major League Baseball article. It's all there. It's all there, and if you haven't gotten a chance to check it out, please do. FYI, do you know that there are USGA Amateur Championships happening? The U.S. Women's Amateur happening right now. Right now. Woodmont Country Club in Maryland. Medalist Rachel Heck, who's actually from Memphis, Tennessee, shouts to the 901. Won 4-3 this morning to advance to the round of 16. She was the stroke play medalist. So those of you who don't know how it works, the U.S. AMs, you have a stroke play event, top 64 in the stroke play event. So, under par, just like a PGA Tour event. Stroke play event, top 64. After 3 rounds, I believe. It might be 2. It might be 2 rounds. I don't know off the top of my head. Top 64 players after that put into a 64-player bracket. Rachel Heck, the medalist, the lowest score out of the stroke play. The medalist hasn't won this tournament since 2008. She has a chance to do so. She won 4-3 today in the round of 32 to advance to the round of 16. She has a chance to do just that. She's still making it through. Bryson DeChambeau leaned on his driver and broke it. That's actually hilarious. Of course that would happen to him. He was, very cool about it, didn't freak out or anything. It was just, of course, that kind of thing would happen to him. 66 NFL players opt out of playing in the upcoming season. They had a Thursday deadline. You had to decide by then. 66 NFL players have opted out. All but 3 teams had a player opt out. Ben Simmons out indefinitely with subluxation of the left kneecap. John Higgins makes his first Crucible 147 at the World Snooker Championship. I believe that's a billiards thing. And it's a wild, wild day in hockey as well. Lots of qualifying round games. Lots of playoff. There are lots of teams that could miss the playoffs that weren't supposed to. A lot of teams that had low winning percentages have a chance to clinch playoff spots today. I'm not going to sit here and act like I have enough to tell you about what's happening over there in any real way. But it's a good time to be a hockey fan. There's a lot going on in the NHL bubbles as well. But that's going to do it. It's another week of 110 Sports. If you haven't checked out the content, like I said on the site, 110sportsmedia.com, please do. This podcast right here, Jays for Days, we have another one, The Bonfire, recording another one of those today that'll be out in the next few days. Lots of podcasts, lots of shows, lots of articles. You can find it all at 110sportsmedia.com. But have a great weekend, everybody. I'll be back on Monday at 11 a.m. Eastern, Touchline Talk and Around the Bases with Chris Brown, 11 a.m. Eastern and 1 p.m. Eastern on Tuesday. But I'll be back on Monday, 11 a.m. Eastern. We'll meet back here, same place, same time. I'll see you on Monday.